Hi, I'm Scotty. Welcome to my channel, Scotty's Clock World. Thanks for dropping by. We're going to remove the mainspring clamp from the going side great wheel first. I'll open that up. I'll put the spring back onto the main wheel. We're going to put the winding arbor section, the square section, into the chuck, and then we need, actually I'll turn that round a little bit before we start and get a better view of it. Okay, we'll try that. It's better, we'll have a better view of that now. Alright, so what we're going to do now, we're going to wind the spring winder up, make sure that's tight, remove it, and I think that's sliding actually. I'll undo that. Yep, I'm pretty sure that that is sliding. I'll loosen that off and reset the, yeah, it slipped in a bit far. Alright, let's try that. You just heard that noise there. That means that the lug on the winding arbor has come out of the center of the mainspring. So I'll show you what we do about that to tighten it up. Release the tension on the chuck. Take the mainspring out, and when we're turning it, what's happening is you can see there's a gap there. There shouldn't be that big a gap. And as the lug turns round, it catches on the whole end and then drops out. Where's our let down tool? As it winds up, it gets tighter and tighter, and then it drops out. Alright. How we fix that? May not need to, looks like it might have finally caught. Well, tighten that down again. Put our holding arm back on. Put the safety back up. It should just slide into there. And get back to winding again and see if we, nope, still sliding out. Alright, so how we fix that problem, we'll take the great wheel off again, unwind it, winder might jump it out easier. I think, no, it's still there. It's holding relatively well when it's not very tight. As it gets tighter, it jumps out. And that's the lug that we're talking about, that lug there. And that has to catch on the whole end inside there. But you can see there's a pretty decent sized hole there. So what we'll do with that, we have to reduce the size of that. And to do that, we find where the end is. And then using a long nose pair of pliers, we slide it into the gap. Haven't got a lot of room to move here with the spring winder still set up. And then we just wind it in the direction of it being wound up, and that will slowly reduce the size of the hole in there. And you can see we're starting to reduce the size of the hole in there because there's a gap appearing there. Alright, we'll try that and see if that's going to hold. Push the spring back onto the great wheel. That looks like it might have held. We'll give that a try. Alright, winding arbor back into the chuck. Put our end in and the safety on, cover that over, and Now start winding and see how we go. And you can see that that has solved the problem, and the mainspring clamp comes off straight away. So reverse the flow on the winder and then slowly let it down. We don't want to let it rush because it'll blow out all over the place. You can see it's unwound there now. Alright, take it off the clamp to there, and there's our spring. It's very dry, strangely enough, seeing everything in the clock is flooded with oil, but that is very dry actually. Right, so we're now going to clean that with some kerosene. I'll put a piece of paper down here so I don't drown my bench. And what we're going to do now, I think I'll move our spring winder over a bit so you can see what's happening. There we go. You can see that now. What I need now, a little bit of kerosene on a little piece of scourer pad, being one of those. I'll just dip it into the bottle and get it wet. Make sure I don't spill any on the desk. What we do now is we fold the piece of scourer pad in half and then slowly rub it up and down the spring. We travel all the way along on the spring and let the spring winder just spins around, and we continue running backwards and forwards along the spring until we reach as far as we can go up it. That's got a loop in it there. I'll take that out and wind it around, and we can continue. We're just about as far as we're going to go there. So what we want now is a cloth. Doesn't have to be particularly clean, long as it's dry. And then let the spring run through your fingers while you're holding the cloth on the spring. And you're removing the kerosene from the spring. Twang, and off it goes. Alright, so that's the first part, but what we've got to do now is make sure that our spring is actually clean. I'll get a piece of clean cloth. So what we'll do now is we'll go back to the end of the spring. That brings up the beginning of the spring. So once again, as we did with our last piece of cloth, and this is clean cloth this time, we slowly pull the spring through the clean cloth while we're holding it relatively tightly. And let down the pressure on the mainspring, and it'll just spin round like rattling a carpet snake or a python, one of these things. One of these long springs, they're seriously strong. Alright, there we go, that's the end of the spring. Change the position on your cloth and run the spring back in the opposite direction. And there we go. Now we'll put some grease on the spring and then put it away in a plastic bag once we've wound it up again, so that we know which train it comes from. That's the bag we're going to put it in, and you can see it's got going written on it. It's obviously been used before, there's grease and stuff in it. That's the going side mainspring, and that's the bag we're going to put it in. Alright, now I'll take the spring off the spring winder under our little chuck, comes straight out, So we can now grease the spring. Now the spring is clean, we can now re-grease it before we compress it again and put a mainspring clamp on it. This is the grease we'll be using, PTFE grease that I use on all my clock springs. It's too strong to use on watch springs, you use a fine oil on that. But for clock springs, it works very, very well. So, using a toothpick, we pick up a little bit of grease and then start to work our way around each coil. You don't need very much, and you only work on one side of the coil, because once the spring is compressed, the grease will be squashed onto both sides of each coil, and thereby it's well lubricated. If you put grease on both sides at this stage, you'd have way too much, and there'd be a huge amount of grease that'd be squeezed out on the spring winder when you're compressing the spring. There'll always be a little bit of excess on it, but that's not a problem because we wipe it off once we're finished with compressing the spring and before it goes in the bag, and then it just sits there. Then when we're ready to start rebuilding the movement, our spring is ready, we know which train it comes from, it's clean, it's greased, and it's ready to roll. I'll just check a couple of these pieces down here to make sure I've got sufficient grease on them. A little bit in down here, run it round, and that one in there, and make sure that you've got grease in between each of the coils. And you can see if you've missed any areas. A little bit up there. No, that's looking all right. Okay, put the grease aside, and that's what a greased spring looks like before it goes back onto the spring winder and gets compressed, and then the excess grease is squeezed out of it. And that's what we're going to do now. Right, we're ready to compress our spring again. So we put the great wheel winding arm back into it, tighten it down in the chuck, and put our little clamp on it there to hold it in place, and we'll see how we went. Right, the spring's back on the spring winder now, and it's catching nicely now. Keep our fingers on the side of it so that it doesn't jump out. Wind it up and then check to see how much room we need more to put on our mainspring clamp, and it's spinning nice and easily. So we reverse the winder and then slowly let it wind down, holding the mainspring clamp in the center of the mainspring until all the tension is gone. Then open up the spring winder, remove the great wheel from it, and there we have it. There's our re-round spring. You can see now that the excess grease I was talking about has pushed out once we've flattened and tightened the coil. So we just run round the piece of cloth now, remove the excess grease that we've pushed out, clean it up. Once we've done that, so we then turn over the other side and wipe over the top of the coils like so, and that removes the excess grease. So we've got just the right amount of grease in there that we want now, that's going to last 4 or 5 years until the clock comes in for service once again, and it's all nice and neat. And there it is. Right, now that goes into our plastic bag with going written on it. That now gets put aside and waits until we start to reassemble the movement. I'll do the strike side mainspring off camera, and then we'll be back to continue. Plop that in under there. And then there we go. Stay there for a moment.